Chapter 2065. Dumpling nodded seriously. Thus, since you and His Highness said that we won't lose, we definitely won't lose. As she spoke, she sighed regretfully. Sigh, it's a pity that Dumpling can't help much in this round. Rong Xiu smiled faintly. It's good if you can take this opportunity to improve your strength. After all, Dumpling was Chu Liyue's magical beast. If Dumpling's strength improved, it would be a good thing for Chu Liyue. Dumpling was greatly encouraged and clenched her small fists. His Highness is right. Then I'll go now. Before her voice died away, the small reddish-gold figure disappeared into the vast Tianlai Sea again. Rong Xiu looked up slightly. More than 10 days had passed, but the number of Tianlai in this vast space didn't seem to decrease by much. Clearly, they had devoured a lot of Tianlai before, but compared to the vast Tianlai Sea, it was still not worth mentioning. Looking up, they could only see dazzling light and silver light flashing. After all, Tang had accumulated Tianlai for 10,000 years. Rumble. Suddenly, a series of explosions came one after another. Rong Xiu looked away and saw countless Tianlai striking down at the same time. They went straight for Shangguanjing. In front of him, the docking jade spirit embryo finally showed the shape of a sword after being polished by countless Tianlai for a long time. A layer of dazzling silver light covered it, making it almost impossible to look directly at it. The powerful pressure that was spreading out from above was still rising. More and more Tianlai landed on it and polished it bit by bit. Even Shangguanjing's figure was shrouded by the brilliant light, making it difficult to distinguish him. Is Shangguanjing's divine artifact finally going to be completed? Among the three of them, he is the only one who attracted the heavenly lightning purely by forging a divine weapon. If I remember correctly, the dark jade spirit embryo should have already devoured thousands of heavenly lightning during this period of time. As expected, he's powerful. Such ability really makes people sigh in admiration. Of all of us here, how many can be mentioned in the same breath as him? In my opinion, Shangguanjing is indeed the best among us when it comes to refining tools. However, he did not know who would have the last laugh in this competition. Shangguanjing had already reached the final step of forging the divine weapon in his hand. Countless bolts of heavenly lightning came crashing down, completely annihilating the long sword forged from the dark jade spirit embryo. At this moment, the energy in his body was almost completely exhausted. This was the largest amount of Tianlai he had ever triggered in his entire life when he was refining a divine artifact. Not bad. Without a doubt, this was a venerable artifact. Moreover, it was the most powerful existence he could refine in his entire life. The shocking commotion even attracted the attention of Chu Liyue and Wei Zhe. The two of them also raised their heads and looked over. Chu Liyue's eyes lit up. This was the first time she had seen Taizu refining a venerable artifact with her own eyes. It was even more shocking than she had imagined. Wei Zhe clenched his fists tightly, and deep jealousy surged from the bottom of his heart. He knew very well that with his talent, even if he cultivated for another 100 years, he would not be able to reach Shangguanjing's level. Fortunately, he still had his own trump card. It did not matter if he could not compare to Shangguanjing for the time being. Only the one who could last until the end would be able to obtain Tang Ke's inheritance. Thinking of this, he took a deep look at the purple-black hammer in front of him. Buzz. The sword hummed. Shangguanjing finally stretched out his hand and gripped the dark jade spirit sword in front of him tightly. In an instant, terrifying sword chi spread out in all directions. It was almost about to cut open space. A gentle yet vigorous energy slowly surged forth, completely surrounding the sword chi. Tang Ke's voice sounded with a smile. This is almost the top level among the venerable artifacts. It's just a little bit away from breaking through the shackles and becoming a divine artifact. Shangguanjing, you are indeed very outstanding. His words were filled with undisguised praise and admiration. In the current world, there were very few people who could refine a divine artifact of such a standard. Shangguanjing carefully sized up the long sword in his hand and was very excited. The timing, location, and people were right. To a large extent, he was able to succeed this time because of the power of Tianlai here. Although he did not break through the threshold and truly forge a divine artifact, in fact, Shen Guanjing was already very satisfied. He knew that if he wanted to advance to the next level, it was far from as simple as everyone thought. Otherwise, after Tang Ku and Mr. Su, no one in the Divine Ruins world had successfully refined a divine artifact for 10,000 years. He vaguely sensed that if he wanted to do this, he would need some kind of help, but he was not sure what it was exactly. This Dark Jade Spirit Sword was the strongest divine artifact that he could refine with all his life's knowledge. He took a deep breath. Thank you, Senior Tang Ku. If it were not for this place, he did not know how much effort he would have to put in to forge this sword. Tang Ku laughed. There's no need to thank me. After all, you're outstanding enough. Do you still want to continue this competition? Shen Guanjing paused for a moment, shook his head, and sighed with a smile. The crowd immediately quieted down. They were a little surprised by Shen Guanjing's decision, but they felt that it was reasonable. This sword had already exhausted his strength. Even if he forced himself to continue, it might be meaningless. It was better to end it here. In the last period of time, the Dark Jade Spirit Sword had devoured a lot of Tianlei. Compared to the three of them, it was still unknown who would win. Even if Shen Guanjing lost in the end, he had forged such a top venerable divine artifact. This time, he had made a huge profit. Okay. Tang Ku did not seem surprised by his choice. Here, you have devoured a total of 1,381 Tianlei, and you are currently ranked first. If the two of them can't surpass your number, the winner will be you. This number made many people secretly speechless. If you have the opportunity in the future, it might not be impossible for you to refine a divine artifact. Tang Ku's last sentence immediately made everyone suck in a breath of cold air. Was this an admission that Shen Guanjing had the potential to refine a divine artifact? Shen Guanjing's heart skipped a beat, and then he lowered his head slightly. Thank you for your kind words. Everyone had different expressions, and the way they looked at Shen Guanjing was very different from before. Since Tang Ku had said so, it was basically confirmed. Even if Shen Guanjing did not win this time, the news of what he saw today was enough to shock the world and make them admire him. Shen Guanjing cupped his fists and bowed politely. Then he turned around and walked towards the entrance. Seeing his arrival, everyone couldn't help but feel nervous. Shen Guan, congratulations. The few old men who came with Shen Guanjing were the first to react and went forward to congratulate him. The rest of the people hurriedly echoed. Congratulations, Senior Shen Guan. Senior has been silent for many years. Now that you're making a move again, it's indeed amazing. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from the Love Network. Chapter 2066. Everyone's attitude had an obvious change. After Tang Ku and Mr. Su, no one else in the Divine Ruins world had successfully refined a divine weapon in the past 10,000 years. Now Tang Ku had personally said that Shen Guanjing had a chance. This was the first one in 10,000 years. Naturally, it was different. In the past, although Shen Guanjing was also famous, there were many weapon-refining venerables in the world, and each of them was very arrogant. No one was willing to lower their heads and admit defeat. Even if they met, they couldn't stand each other. This was also why some people secretly mocked Shen Guanjing, Chu Luiyue, and the rest at the start. But it was different now. Tang Ku's words were like gold. From now on, who could be compared with Shen Guanjing? The future weapon refining saint. These few words, just thinking about it, made people feel the pressure increase by several times. If Shen Guanjing really succeeded in breaking through in the future, he would be worthy of being the top weapon refining master. At that time, it wouldn't be so easy to make friends with him. If they didn't seize the opportunity now, how could they have a chance in the future? Everyone was much more polite and respectful to Shen Guanjing. They were afraid that he would remember their previous offense. Shen Guanjing smiled and cupped his hands. Thank you for your compliments. I'm just lucky. I don't dare to expect anything else. Now, I only hope that you can successfully end this competition. Although he was smiling, he was very polite. His eyes were clear and calm. Obviously, he didn't take the crowd's eagerness and flattery seriously. After that, he raised his eyes and looked at Chu Luiyue, who was still in the field. It was obvious that he was stubborn. Seeing this, everyone could only temporarily dispel the many thoughts in their hearts. Shangguanjing had lived for so many years. He had once been all-powerful and had experienced life and death. What kind of scene had he not seen? Such an old fox was very slippery. At this time, it was useless to say anything. The crowd gradually quieted down. No matter what, they could only wait until the competition was over. Now, only Chu Luiyue and Wei Zhe were left in the field, and they were still in the final competition. Above the two of them, Tianlei was continuously gathering and then falling continuously. In the entire space, everyone was silent. Time seemed to pass extremely slowly. At this point, everyone was certain that there was something wrong with the purplish-black hammer in front of Wei Zhe. What was it that could contain more Tianlei than the sacred tool? However, the competition was still ongoing. Since that item was indeed Wei Zhe's, it wasn't considered a violation of the rules. Naturally, everyone could only watch. In the silence, Tang Ke's voice rang out once more. Wei Zhe, 1382. A commotion broke out in the crowd. The amount of Tianlei that Wei Zhe had devoured had already surpassed that of Shangguanjing. This also meant that Shangguanjing was not fated to be first. Some people peeked at Shangguanjing, only to find that he was calm and did not seem to be disappointed. Shangguanjing had a bright future after being praised by Tang Ke. Even if he didn't win this round, it wouldn't affect him much. In fact, Shangguanjing cared more about Chu Luiyue than whether he won or lost. Now, he only hoped that she could defeat Wei Zhe. There was something wrong with Wei Zhe's hammer. He didn't know how long it could last. After such a long time, the flowing cloud flying diagram seemed to be almost full. Looking at that calm face, Shangguanjing clenched his fists. 5 days passed in the blink of an eye. The past few days felt like a year to them. However, the winner of the competition hadn't been decided yet. Chu Luiyue had consumed a lot of force and spirit. At this moment, her face was a little pale, and her lips were pale. There was a faint bruise under her eyes, and she looked really haggard. Wei Zhe's situation seemed to be much better than Chu Luiyue's. After all, he was older, and in all aspects of cultivation, he was stronger than Chu Luiyue. If this continued, the one who would win in the end would probably be Wei Zhe. At this moment, the speed of Tianlei above the flowing cloud flying diagram had greatly decreased. Obviously, the number of Tianlei that the flowing cloud flying diagram could accommodate had reached its limit. Chu Luiyue stood up again. Wei Zhe turned his head, glanced at her, and snorted. What's wrong? Is Master you going to stretch your muscles again? The two saint artifacts were already saturated and she herself was obviously exhausted. He didn't believe that she could still come up with any tricks. This sentence was nothing more than sarcasm. However, Chu Luiyue acted as if she didn't understand him and smiled. She smiled and said, Master Family Wei is really prophetic. Nothing can be hidden from your eyes. Wei Zhe choked. Then he saw Chu Luiyue raise her head slightly and ask, May I ask Senior Tang Ke, how much is the difference between me and Master Family Wei? Tang Ke said, Now, you are at 1562, and Wei Zhe is at 1895. The difference between the two of them was more than 300. This was definitely not a small number. Especially under the premise that the two of them had such a terrifying number, even if there was only one extra Dao, it was not to be underestimated. How could Chu Luiyue catch up with such a huge difference? She looked like a lamp that had run out of oil. Chu Luiyue thanked him and then lowered her head slightly, as if thinking about something. Wei Zhe laughed and pretended to comfort her. Master you, actually, it's already extraordinary that you can persevere until now. Now you are still young. In the future, you may be able to defeat me. What's the point of winning then? Chu Luiyue raised her eyebrows slightly and interrupted Wei Zhe, who didn't know that today's victory would determine whether they could obtain Tang Ke's inheritance. If they lost today, it would be useless no matter how many times they won in the future. Wei Zhe stroked his beard and laughed. You're right, but who doesn't want to win? But sometimes, if you don't have the strength, You shouldn't ask for something that doesn't belong to you. Clang! Before he finished speaking, Chu Liwei suddenly attacked. A green shadow quickly streaked across the sky and then fiercely struck the ground. A few cracks spread out in an instant. Wei Zhe looked at it and suddenly opened his eyes in shock. It was a huge green axe. It was heavy, simple, and powerful. Most importantly, it was actually a sacred artifact. Let me introduce, this is one of the 10 great sacred artifacts, the Great Green Sun Axe. It used to belong to Family Yi, but now, it belongs to me. Chu Liwei said casually. Everyone's hearts were instantly set off by stormy waves. Yi Wentao's Great Green Sun Axe. It actually became Chu Liwei's? It recognized him as its master? Chu Liwei crossed her arms with one hand and held her chin with the other, muttering softly. This still seems a little slow. Digression, 12:30 p.m., 7th update. Remember the mobile version of the website. Chapter 2067. She looked up and glanced at Wei Zhe. Patriarch Wei, is it convenient for me to ask you something? How much of this hammer of yours have you unleashed? The corner of Wei Zhe's eyes twitched. How could she ask so directly? She's too rude. He gritted his teeth and said coldly, Master Yu, I advise you to stop struggling. Even if you have a third divine artifact, how much strength do you have left? It won't do you any good to hold on and exhaust your body. Chu Liwei smiled. I know my own body well, so you don't have to worry about it. You just have to answer my question. Wei Zhe frowned. Chu Liwei blinked. It seems that you don't want to talk about it. But it doesn't matter. After all, we're competitors now. It's normal for you to react this way. Wei Zhe felt suffocated. He shouldn't have asked this question. Why did it sound like he was being stingy when she said it? If that's the case, I can only do my best. Chu Liwei sighed. Wei Zhe was amused and angry at the same time. But, did Master Yu hold back before? Chu Liwei curled her lips and didn't say anything. Instead, she suddenly took 3 steps back. Then, with a thought, a stream of light flew out from the interspatial ring on her hand. A venerable artifact. Someone said in a low voice. The sword Qi was piercingly cold. What Chu Liwei summoned was her own red Shao sword. Wei Zhe was stunned at first, but then he couldn't help but laugh. But, Master, you can't summon more divine artifacts now, so you've replaced them with a venerable artifact? However, even if your cultivation as a craftsman isn't high, you should know that there's a huge gap between a venerable artifact and a divine artifact, right? So what if you summon another venerable one artifact? The Scarlet Heaven sword floated in the air. Chu Liwei flicked his finger, emitting a clear and melodious sword cry. She narrowed her eyes and her red lips curled into a small, playful smile. A venerable one's divine weapon is naturally insignificant in this battle. Who said I would only summon one? Just as she finished speaking, several streams of light gushed out from her palms. Dazzling rays of light appeared one after another and arranged themselves neatly in front of Chu Liwei in the blink of an eye. Wisps of aura spread out from it. 1, 2, 3, 8. Wei Zhe subconsciously counted again. Every time he called out a number, his eyes widened. As he counted to the end, his voice began to tremble, and his eyes were filled with disbelief. 8 pieces, 8 venerable artifacts. She must be crazy. She had summoned so many at once. Was she planning to use them to trigger Tianlei? She must have a death wish. Not only Wei Zhe, but the others who were watching were also in a state of confusion. Some suspected that they had seen wrongly and even counted back and forth a few times. However, there were indeed 8 pieces. The crowd was in an uproar. I remember now. Rumor has it that when they got married, Shangguanjing gave her 6 venerable artifacts on the spot. I guess the ones in front of us are those, right? But aren't there 6 of them? Even with her Scarlet Heaven sword, there are only 7. Why is there an extra one? Hearing this, Chu Liwei turned her head and explained with a smile, there's another one. It's a gift from my father. However, it was originally made by Taizu. The extra one was naturally the Tianling scepter. As soon as she finished speaking, the Tianling scepter flew over and circled Chu Luiyue proudly, swaying back and forth happily. Chu Luiyue tapped it lightly. "Don't be so smug. If you don't do a good job later, I won't forgive you." On the Tianling scepter, the dragon's eyes shone brightly. After swaying a few times, it finally obediently returned to line up with the rest. Everyone was speechless. She had already taken the initiative to explain. What else was there to ask? One had to know that apart from the family Yi and the Nan family, the remaining first-rate families and clans would probably have to empty their pockets even if they could take out 8 venerable artifacts. But now, Chu Luiyue had taken out so many on her own. In fact, Chu Luiyue had even more in her hands. After all, she had previously exploited quite a lot from the family. However, if she summoned too many at once, she was worried that she might not be able to handle it. Moreover, it would be too ostentatious. Therefore, she planned to try these first. Of course, at this moment, Chu Luiyue had completely forgotten that she had summoned 3 venerable artifacts. What else could be more ostentatious than this? This should be enough. She let out a long breath. If it wasn't enough, she could just add more later. Wei Zhe was already in a daze. He was speechless. Ever since Chu Luiyue appeared, her every move had far exceeded Wei Zhe's expectations. He really didn't know what was in Chu Luiyue's head. Most importantly, where were her limits and limits? Wei Zhe closed his eyes and finally managed to regain his rationality. Master Yu is really rich and imposing. However, it seems like Master Yu doesn't understand the principle of biting off more than you can chew. In order to win, she was willing to do anything. Wasn't she afraid that she would choke to death? Chu Luiyue stretched her neck and wrists. After sitting for so long without rest or sleep, it would be strange if she wasn't tired. Master Family Wei will soon find out whether I can chew it to death or not. As she spoke, she closed her eyes and waited with bated breath. In the next moment, a turbulent force gushed out of her dantian. Above her, countless Tianlei seemed to have sensed something. They began to feel uneasy and gradually increased their swimming speed. Chu Luiyue shouted, "Fall!" As soon as she spoke, streaks of silver light struck down one after another. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 2068. This time, the number of Tianlei that came crashing down was several times more than before. Sparks flew everywhere, and the light was blinding. Even Chu Luiyue's figure was almost shrouded by the white light, and it was difficult to see clearly. The rumbling sounds came one after another, almost causing one's ears to buzz. Wei Zhe looked at the scene in front of him in a daze, and for a moment he actually forgot to move. Chu Luiyue actually summoned so many Tianlei at once? How did she do it? Her force and spirit had already been exhausted to a terrifying extent, and logically speaking, she should be at her limit now. But how did she become even stronger? This time, not only did she use the Great Green Sun Axe, but she also used 8 venerable artifact. There was indeed a huge gap between a venerable artifact and a holy artifact that was difficult to cross. However, when there were many of them, the accumulated power was also very shocking. At the very least, the number of Tianlei summoned by Chu Luiyue combined was not inferior to the Great Green Sun Axe. If she continued to progress at this speed, it wouldn't be long before the gap between the two of them would be closed. At that time, Wei Zhe might even be overtaken. What the hell? After a while, Wei Zhe came back to his senses and could not help but curse. Originally, he was sure to win. Now that he had been tossing around like this, he had consumed a lot of energy. However, no matter what, Chu Luiyue had already continued, and it was useless for him to say anything. Helpless, Wei Zhe could only try his best to calm the anger in his heart and refocus his attention on the purple-black hammer in front of him. However, listening to the continuous movements from Chu Luiyue's side, he could not completely calm down. Every once in a while, he could not help but turn his head to look. He had always thought that Chu Luiyue was only using this radical method to win, and that she would not be able to last long. However, a quarter of an hour passed. 2 hours passed. The situation on Chu Luiyue's side was still the same. The gap between the two sides was constantly shrinking. Wei Zhe gradually became impatient. He wanted to control the dark purple hammer in front of him to speed up the devouring of Tianlei, but he knew it was impossible. After all, this thing was not under his control. Thinking of this, Wei Zhe took a deep breath. In any case, there was no time limit for this match. He did not believe that Chu Luiwei could keep doing this. Xue Xue flew back from Tianlei Sea and arrived at Rong Xiu's feet. It stretched and licked its claws before lying down in satisfaction. One could vaguely see a few silver snake-like streams of light flashing across its snow-white fur. The aura around its body was also much stronger than before. It could be seen that after this trip, it had devoured a lot of energy, and its strength had greatly increased. I haven't been this happy in a long time. Xue Xue squinted her eyes and started to feel sleepy. Rong Xiu glanced at it. After devouring so much energy in one go, it would take some time for Xue Xue to completely digest it and convert it into its own energy. Rong Xiu raised his wrist slightly, and his slender fingers moved gently in the air. A golden stream of light flew out and quickly formed a small barrier around Xue Xue's body. With the protection of this barrier, Xue Xue could completely block out external disturbances and focus on cultivating. Xue Xue made another sound in its throat, and its icy blue eyes shone. Woo woo woo, I'm so touched. I can finally feel Master's warmth. However, Rong Xiu's next sentence mercilessly dealt it a heavy blow. Your bloodline is not as good as dumplings. This is already the limit. Just rest well for the time being. Xue Xue was confused. Master, are you hinting that I'm not as good as dumpling? Rong Xiu's voice was cold. No, it's clear. Xue Xue was speechless. It knew that it was harder than ascending to the heavens to hear a compliment from Master. Xue Xue looked at Dumpling with resentment. At this moment, she was still running happily in the sea of lightning, as if she would never be tired. Actually, even among ancient divine beasts, there were very few who could be like Dumpling. The Tianlei here contained extremely strong energy. Those who were not strong enough would probably not be able to withstand the raging energy. However, Dumpling did not. She had a pure bloodline and had already opened her 5th meridian. This energy basically could not cause her any harm. She had an extremely strong physical body and great potential. That was why she could move freely in this sea of lightning. Xue Xue hesitated for a long time. Although it did not want to admit it, Dumpling was indeed much stronger than it in this aspect. If you want to win, it's not impossible. Rong Xiu's lips moved slightly. Xue Xue immediately looked up excitedly and met its master's deep eyes. A sense of uneasiness welled up in its heart. The next moment, it heard Rong Xiu say casually, "Just go to the Red Moon Desert a few more times." Oh, I knew it. Xue Xue closed its eyes and decided to play dead. Time passed slowly. The competition between the two had finally reached its climax. Seeing that Wei Zhe and Chu Luiwei were still running, the crowd had complicated expressions. There was really something wrong with these two. Otherwise, they would not have been able to fight until now. Shang Guanyu is catching up, right? I think it won't be long before she overtakes him. She is indeed very fast now, but Wei Zhe is not to be trifled with. Didn't you notice that from the beginning until now, the speed at which he devoured Tianlei was the same? There was no fluctuation at all? Now that you mention it, it does seem like, TSK, this is not right, right? No matter what, it can't be so stable. If there was no problem, he would have been defeated long ago. How could he have lasted until now? I think it's not that he's powerful, but that his hammer is extraordinary. But that's just a venerable artifact. I wonder how he did it? All kinds of discussions could be heard one after another. Shang Guanjing's gaze kept wandering between the two of them. Every time he looked at Wei Zhe, he would frown. The current situation was that everyone knew that there was something wrong with Wei Zhe's hammer, but they did not know what the problem was. He had been observing for a long time, but he still did not find anything unusual. It was as if his hammer was a bottomless pit. Thinking of this, Shang Guanjing became even more worried. Although Chu Luiyue had been chasing after him quickly, it had consumed a lot of her energy. What if the competition was still not over after the Great Green Sun Axe and the venerable artifact were full? He could tell that she really wanted to win. At this moment, Wei Zhe suddenly moved. He cut his palm, and a stream of red blood flew out and landed on the purplish-black hammer. For a moment, the wind whistled. Remember the mobile version of the website. Chapter 2069. His sudden action shocked everyone. Because it was too sudden. For such a long time, no matter what happened, Wei Zhe had always been very calm. No one expected him to suddenly attack at this time. Could it be that he's anxious because he's about to be caught? Many people guessed. This was also the most reasonable explanation. The warm blood landed on the hammer and was absorbed in the blink of an eye, leaving no trace behind. Then, the patterns on it seemed to light up a little. An astonishing aura spread out from it. The Tianlei above seemed to be summoned by some kind of power and began to surge over quickly, gradually forming a silver vortex. And Wei Zhe was at the center. No, to be precise, it was the hammer in front of him. Chu Luiyue also placed a holy artifact in front of her, but the feeling they gave off was very different. On Chu Luiyue's side, everyone could clearly feel that she was the one who activated these holy artifacts and venerable artifacts, attracting the Tianlei. On the other hand, Wei Zhe's side, it was more like the hammer itself was attracting the Tianlei to fall one after another. Wei Zhe's presence seemed to be somewhat dispensable, wind and thunder rolled. This commotion also alarmed Chu Luiyue. She turned her head and narrowed her eyes dangerously. At this moment, Wei Zhe's condition was very strange. His face was very pale and large beads of sweat fell from his forehead. There was also a trace of blood slowly seeping out from the corner of his mouth, which he quickly wiped away. The aura on his body was also much weaker than before. In the eyes of others, perhaps it was because he had suddenly erupted and used all the power in his body to trigger the Tianlei. However, Chu Luiyue did not think so. Because Wei Zhe's appearance was not purely due to the exhaustion of origin power and spirit. Chu Luiyue's gaze turned slightly and looked at the hammer in front of him thoughtfully. For some reason, she felt that Wei Zhe was the one being controlled, Family Wei Master. Chu Luiyue suddenly opened her mouth and called out to him. Wei Zhe did not seem to hear her and did not react. His eyes were still fixed on the hammer in front of him. Family Wei Master? Chu Luiyue's voice rose a little. This time, Wei Zhe finally turned his head. Chu Luiyue's heart sank. Wei Zhe's face was as pale as a ghost, and his aura and spirit were very dispirited. Compared to before, he was like a completely different person. Furthermore, all of this was because he had cut open his palm and left a trace of blood on the hammer. What shocked and worried her the most was Wei's eyes. When he first turned his head and looked at her, his eyes were lifeless, as if they were shrouded in a thick layer of fog. Although his expression quickly returned to normal and only a deep fatigue was left in his eyes, Chu Luiyue still felt that something was wrong. Family Wei Master, I return all the words you said to me just now. Although the competition is important, your health is the most important thing. Chu Luiyue said word by word. A trace of anger and resentment appeared in Wei Zhe's eyes, but he did not say anything. He only turned his head and ignored her. This time, Chu Luiyue was even more certain of her guess. However, what she did not understand was that if she could sense that something was wrong, then Tang Ku could as well. But why didn't he say anything until now? More and more people from Tianlei flocked to Wei Zhe. Chu Luiyue had finally evened the score with great difficulty. Now that Wei Zhe suddenly made such a move, the gap between them widened again. Seeing the situation change again, the onlookers unconsciously quieted down and waited with bated breath. They could all see that both of them had used their last trump cards. The winner or loser would be revealed soon. Sheng Guanjing slowly clenched his fists. The key to the problem now was not only that Wei Zhe was faster than Chu Luiyue in devouring Tianlei, but more importantly, Wei Zhe had already started to snatch Tianlei. The people from Tianlei, who were originally flocking to Chu Luiyue, seemed to be attracted by some kind of power on Wei Zhe's side. They all changed their direction and went straight there. On Chu Luiyue's side, The number of people from Tianlei was getting smaller and smaller. Even if she could still hold on, if she couldn't compete with Wei Zhe, the result would be the same. Sheng Guanjing wasn't the only one who noticed this. Many of the blacksmiths who were watching the battle also noticed this. I didn't expect Wei Zhe to be so powerful. He actually managed to snatch Tianlei from Sheng Guanyu. If this goes on, he will monopolize the market. When that happens, Sheng Guanyu will definitely lose. Usually, when two people fight for Tianlei, one of them has to be much stronger than the other to be able to do so. However, Wei Zhe's strength isn't the best in this aspect. Moreover, Sheng Guanyu has several divine artifacts. How can this be? No wonder Wei Zhe was so arrogant just now. It turns out that he has such a powerful trump card. This time, he is going to win. Even if Sheng Guanyu has a divine artifact, it will be difficult for them to compete with him. All kinds of noises entered her ears. Chu Luiwei retracted her gaze and gently closed her eyes. Of course, she understood what they were talking about. At this moment, the Tianlei was no longer surging toward her. Even the Sun Great Axe and the other weapons were still holding back. If this went on, she naturally couldn't. After pondering for a moment, she raised her hand, and with a thought, she recalled all the items in front of her. Soon, there was only emptiness left around her. When the crowd saw this, they subconsciously fell silent. Is she going to admit defeat? Taking drastic measures to deal with the situation. Family Wei is really powerful, Chu Luiwei said. Wei Zhe looked over again with a strange smile on his face. It's not too late to admit defeat. Chu Luiwei smiled and ignored his words. She only clapped her hands, dusted off the dust on her body, and looked up. What I hate the most in my life is when people rob me of my things. Her voice was very soft, as if it would be blown away by the wind at any moment. Family Wei, since that's the case, why don't we have a bet and see who will be the winner? Wei Zhe was stunned and immediately frowned. You're not mine, right? In the next moment, the woman suddenly tapped the ground with the tip of her foot and flew out like an arrow leaving the bow. She headed straight for the endless sea of lightning. Wonderful book house. Chapter 2070. This action immediately caused everyone to be greatly shocked. Is she crazy? She actually wants to barge into the Thunder Sea? Those Tianlei contain extremely shocking power. She's really not afraid of death by doing this. Wei Zhe just used his hand to grab it before and was directly burned. She's really bold to rush in rashly. I guess she's unhappy that those Tianlei were forcefully taken away by Wei Zhe. She's indeed quite capable, but she's still young and frivolous. That Thunder Sea is no different from a place of life and death for human cultivators. Does she think that she can freely travel through it like a crimson gold sky phoenix? Obviously, everyone was very pessimistic about Chu Luiwei's actions. Some people secretly shook their heads as if they had already seen the result. The few people standing beside Sheng Guanjing couldn't help but ask in a low voice, Sheng Guanjing, are you really not worried at all? Sheng Guanjing's face was expressionless, and no one could tell what he was thinking at this time. Hearing this, he paused and said, never does anything that she's not confident in. Courting death? He didn't think so. She must have her own reasons for daring to do this. I believe in her. In the eyes of the surrounding people, Sheng Guanjing's words were just stubborn. After all, she was his most beloved junior. How could he really not be worried? This was not Peach Blossom Dock, where she could do whatever she wanted. They couldn't see anything from Sheng Guanjing's expression. Some people turned their eyes slightly and looked at Rong Xiu. At this moment, he was looking up, and his thin scarlet lips were slightly raised. His smooth jawline was raised like a jade carving. There seemed to be waves surging in his phoenix-like eyes that were as deep as the sea. From afar, not only was he not worried at all, he seemed to be quite interested. Needless to say, this person seemed to be more ambitious than Sheng Guanjing. Many people looked at each other. It was probably because Chu Luiwei defeated Yi Wentao previously, which made them extremely confident in Chu Luiwei. So much so that they even felt that Chu Luiwei could easily deal with such a situation. After the initial shock, Wei Zhe quickly regained his senses. His pale and colorless lips were tightly pursed. His eyes were cold, and there was a hint of cold ridicule at the corners of his eyes. Insolence. It was true that she had contracted the Crimson Gold Heavenly Phoenix, but that didn't mean that she had the same amazing physical strength as the Crimson Gold Heavenly Phoenix. In the previous battle with Yi Wentao, it was said that to a large extent, he had relied on the two contracted mythical beasts to achieve victory. As for herself, in the end, he was only a high deity. How could a mortal body resist this endless Tianlei? Wei Zhe looked up and sneered, waiting for Chu Luiyue to return in defeat. Countless pairs of eyes were also focused on that figure at this moment. Chu Luiyue flew into the air and stood in the middle. Countless heavenly lightning bolts slowly drifted across the surroundings. Layers of oppressive might spread out from it, making it hard for everyone to breathe. Chu Luiyue's figure was inconspicuous and extremely small here. Her figure was slender and slightly frail. It was as if any bolt of heavenly lightning could easily pierce through her. Chu Luiyue took a deep breath and looked at the Tianlei flowing around her. These heavenly thunders would dodge on their own. As long as one didn't take the initiative, one wouldn't be injured. Previously, Wei Zhe's palm was burned when he reached out to touch the Tianlei out of curiosity. After the others present saw that he had learned his lesson, they all acted carefully and the same thing didn't happen again. However, if this continued, these Tianlei would all be snatched away by Wei Zhe. So, she had to come. Chu Luiyue made up her mind and reached out. Countless people held their breaths and didn't blink, afraid that they would miss something. Chu Luiyue grabbed a Tianlei in her hand. For a moment, sparks flew everywhere. However, just when everyone thought that Chu Luiyue was going to be injured, they saw that her expression didn't change and her heart didn't beat faster. It was as if she wasn't affected at all. Then, she exerted force in her hand, and the Tianlei shattered into countless fine streams of light that surged into her body one after another. Tianlei was crushed and devoured by her bare hands just like that. Everyone was stunned. What's going on? Not only did the Tianlei not cause her any harm, but it also turned into her own power? No. What's that in her hand? Someone in the crowd suddenly shouted. Everyone looked over instinctively and saw that there seemed to be a dazzling light flickering in Chu Luiyue's hand. That's a divine body? Wei Zhe suddenly realized something. His eyes widened in shock, and his face was full of disbelief. Many people reacted when they heard him say that. That's right. Other than a divine body, what else could help her block that terrifying Tianlei? Upon closer inspection, Chu Luiyue's body was indeed covered by a layer of dazzling soft armor. She floated in midair, and her body was glowing faintly. She was so small in the sea of lightning, yet so dazzling. She was like a twinkling star that couldn't be ignored. A divine body? There are so many divine bodies in the world. Why don't I have any impression of her? Yeah, I've been looking at her for a while, but I can't remember what kind of divine body she cultivated. Dazzling light, soft armor, this? Wait, could it be? Someone seemed to have guessed something but felt that it was too ridiculous. He hesitated and didn't dare to say anything. At that moment, Chu Luiyue raised her hand again and grabbed at the second Tianlei. Although they had used up a lot of their energy earlier, there were too many Tianlei here. Especially since Chu Luiyue was at the center, the density was extremely high. All she needed to do was to reach out her hand, and all the Tianlei would be within her reach. This saved her a lot of trouble. Bang! The second bolt of heavenly lightning shattered in her hand. She was very fast. In a short while, she had dealt with 7 or 8 Tianlei around her. The energy around her had also increased by a lot. Sensing that the force in her body was quickly recovering, Chu Luiyue curled her lips slightly. If I knew it would be so convenient, I wouldn't have wasted so much energy before. Using the sacred artifact to activate the Tianlei had consumed a lot of her energy and spirit. Doing it directly could instead replenish her energy. What a loss, what a loss. Fortunately, she had realized it in time. Otherwise, it would have been a huge loss. As she thought of this, she lowered her head and waved at Wei Zhe. Family Wei, thank you. If he had not forced her to this extent, she would not have realized this. As she spoke, she was still holding onto a tianlei, which was shining brightly. Wei Zhe felt a stinging pain in his eyes, his heart, and his entire body. Shangguan, you don't go overboard. Chu Luwei crushed the tianlei in her hand and smiled casually. Family Wei, how am I going overboard? Weren't you the one who snatched it from me first? If I had any other choice, I wouldn't have done this, right? Wei Zhe almost spat out a mouthful of blood. So it was all his fault. But no matter what, he was not going overboard, right? This was equivalent to directly plundering the heavenly lightning from the source. Chu Luwei quickly swept through the area. How was this enough? Chu Luwei took a step forward. Almost at the same time, the tianlei in front of her took a step back. Chu Luwei paused. She raised her eyebrows and smiled faintly. Hey, why are you hiding? Wonderful book room. Chapter 2071. She waved her hand. Come here. The tianlei in front of her didn't move. There was a hint of coldness in her eyes. I said come here. When the crowd below saw this scene, they were all at a loss. What's Shangguan Yu doing? I think she's greeting the tianlei? Are you kidding me? It's true. Didn't you see that the tianlei retreated a little when she went forward? I don't know why, but I feel that the tianlei are a little afraid of her. Hearing this, everyone's first reaction was that it was ridiculous and unbelievable. They had only heard that people were in awe of the tianlei. When had they ever heard that the tianlei were afraid of people? Wasn't this too ridiculous? However, the situation above seemed to be a little strange. Just as everyone was doubting it, they saw a silver snake-like tianlei move forward hesitantly. Chu Luwei raised her hand and easily grabbed the tianlei in her hand. Her red lips curled up, revealing a satisfied smile. Be obedient. After she finished speaking, she moved her finger, and the heavenly thunder instantly exploded. It turned into countless tiny streams of light that surged into her body. Continue. She raised her eyebrows slightly and moved her finger. Then, everyone saw a scene that they would never forget in their lives. In the Tianlei Sea, the slender and exquisite woman floated in the air. The tianlei seemed to be lining up, moving forward one after another and landing in her hand. Then, they exploded one after another, and the astonishing power contained in them all surged into her body. In a short period of time, the aura around her had risen rapidly, and it showed no signs of stopping. This scene that was beyond their understanding shocked everyone present. They couldn't recover from their shock for a long time. They couldn't be blamed for making a fuss. This kind of scene was too rare. No matter how hard they racked their brains, they couldn't imagine that when Chu Luwei said, snatch, she was really snatching it with her bare hands. Shangguan Jing's tightly clenched hands slowly relaxed, and he secretly let out a long sigh of relief. This girl's trump card was really strong. The corners of Rong Xiu's lips curled up slightly as he shook his head helplessly. Even the corners of his eyes carried a doting smile. She was even more playful than Dumpling. In fact, with her strength, she could have directly devoured all of these tianlei. However, she wanted them to line up and step forward one by one. This was obviously done on purpose for the people below to see. Rong Xiu turned to look at Wei Zhe. At this moment, he was looking up with a dazed expression. Head of family Wei. Rong Xiu suddenly spoke. Wei Zhe was startled. He turned around to look. The shock in his eyes had yet to fade. Clearly, Chu Liyue's move had far exceeded his expectations. Rong Xiu raised his chin and said in a low and pleasant voice, is about to catch up. Why aren't you moving faster? Wei Zhe's face instantly turned green and white. It was very interesting. Of course, he knew this. Did he need others to remind him? Now that Rong Xiu said all this, it was obvious that he was purposely taunting her. Wei Zhe took a deep breath and suppressed the surging emotions in his heart. He said coldly, Head Yu's strength is indeed outstanding. However, I'm a little worried. With Head Yu's current level, if you forcefully devour too many tianlei, I'm afraid your body won't be able to Looks like head of family Wei doesn't know. Rong Xiu interrupted him with a smile. Er's divine body was formed by devouring the god-destroying tribulation. Although these Tianlei are fierce, they should be slightly inferior to the god-destroying tribulation, right? If you have the time to worry about why don't you think about what you're going to do if you lose this round? Wei Zai's pupils shrank. A trace of deep shock flashed across his eyes. After a short moment of dead silence, gasps of cold air sounded one after another. God-destroying tribulation? Wasn't that something that could only be summoned by a venerable god expert? Furthermore, only those at the very top would be able to achieve this. Those who could successfully pass the god-destroying tribulation were even rarer. In the Divine Ruins world, it had been too long since anyone had summoned the god-destroying tribulation. However, Rong Xiu actually said that not only did Chu Luiyue summon it, he even used it as an opportunity to refine his divine body. Many people's first reaction was disbelief. However, Rong Xiu's expression was calm and there was even a smile at the corner of his lips. How did he look like he was lying? Moreover, whether this was true or not, they would know after trying it out. Now that Chu Luiyue was in the Sea of Lightning and could easily devour the Tianlei, wasn't it enough to explain everything? Gorgeous soft armor. It's really the god-destroying tribulation. Someone couldn't help but murmur in shock. Most of the people present were the top blacksmiths, so they more or less had some understanding of the god-destroying tribulation. At this moment, looking at Chu Luiyue and her performance before and after, what was there to doubt? How powerful was the god-destroying tribulation? Compared to these Tianlei, it was more than just a little bit better. Chu Luiyue could even deal with it, let alone these? No wonder she was able to defeat Yi Wentao. With such a divine body, his combat strength is indeed comparable to a venerable god. Naturally, she could easily snatch all of these Tianlei. At this moment, the one who felt the most uncomfortable was Wei Zai. Chu Luiyue's actions were equivalent to directly cutting off his path to Tianlei. As long as a Tianlei wanted to come towards him, Chu Luiyue would quickly move and devour it before he could. The key was that she did it directly, simple, and fast. Straightforward and efficient. She didn't even give him time to react. In a short while, all of the Tianlei were intercepted, and the sky above Wei Zai was empty. At this moment, Chu Luiyue didn't seem unable to withstand the power of the Tianlei. In fact, she seemed to be in better spirits. She only needed to focus on that battle, and the surrounding Tianlei would continuously fall into her hands and become her power. Wei Zai's body trembled, and something seemed to be surging wildly in his chest. Finally, he couldn't help but stand up. At this moment, the number of Tianlei that Chu Luiyue had devoured had already surpassed his. More importantly, as long as she continued to snatch Tianlei, he wouldn't be able to get a single Tianlei. What was the point of continuing this competition? Seeing his actions, Chu Luiyue stopped as well. What, is the head of the family Wei admitting defeat? She asked with a smile. Wei Zai's throat was filled with a thick stench of blood, but he forced it back down. He spoke with difficulty. You are ruthless. This time you win. He had exhausted all the energy in his body, and he couldn't continue. If he forced it, he would probably die here today. He wanted to obtain Tang Ku's inheritance, but he wanted to live even more. Chu Luiyue's smile deepened. Head of the family Wei, thank you for letting me win. Wei Zai didn't want to say another word to Chu Luiyue. He reached out his hand, intending to put away the purple-black hammer. However, at this moment, a reddish-gold figure suddenly flew past him and snatched the hammer away. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 2072. Wei Zai was shocked and quickly looked up. The one who did it was none other than Dumpling. Previously, she had been wandering around, so Wei Zai didn't take her seriously. In addition, all his attention was on Chu Luiyue. In a moment of carelessness, Dumpling took advantage of the loophole. At this moment, Dumpling was holding the hammer in her hand and sizing it up seriously. She knocked it with her hand and sniffed it with her nose. Her face was full of curiosity and inquiry. Wei Zai was scared out of his wits. He immediately pointed at Dumpling and shouted in a trembling voice. What are you doing? Hurry up and return this old man's things. Dumpling grinned. What's the hurry? I just felt that this thing was a little strange and wanted to take a look at it. I'll return it to you later. As she spoke, she looked at the hammer in her hand with a puzzled expression. This thing wasn't heavy. At a glance, it didn't look any different from an ordinary hammer. There seemed to be some patterns engraved on it, but she couldn't understand it. Boom! A cluster of flames burned in Dumpling's hand and quickly surrounded the hammer. Wei Zhe's eyes almost rolled back, and he almost fainted. This time, he was so angry that he couldn't speak. Shangguan, you don't go too far. This crimson gold heavenly phoenix was her contracted fiend. If she hadn't secretly instructed it, this crimson gold heavenly phoenix wouldn't have suddenly attacked. Chu Luwe finally flew down from the sea of lightning and came to Dumpling's side. She touched Dumpling's round hair bun, then looked up at Wei Zhe and smiled. Family Wei, why are you so nervous? Dumpling is still a child. It's inevitable that she's curious and wants to play. Don't mind her taking your things. After all, we can't snatch your things in front of so many people, right? Wei Zhe was furious. Now that the item was in their hands, how could this not be considered robbery? That belongs to this old man. You are already offending him. Shangguan Yu, this old man has already admitted defeat. What else do you want? Chu Luwe blinked. Family Wei, you've misunderstood me. I really don't want to do anything. After all, this belongs to you, doesn't it? Dumpling, hurry up and return the things to the family Wei. Dumpling seemed a little regretful when she heard this, but she still nodded obediently. She grabbed the hammer with both hands and handed it over to Chu Luwe. Chu Luwe took the item. The flames on it also dissipated, revealing its original appearance. Chu Luwe looked down and sized him up, raising his eyebrows slightly. The flames of the crimson gold heavenly phoenix were unable to leave any marks on it. It was not even able to detect any abnormalities. This was the most unusual thing. Even the best refined iron in the world would not remain unchanged after being tossed around by Dumpling. Moreover, the material of this hammer was only above average. Dumpling tugged at Chu Luoyue's sleeve. A trace of regret flashed across her grape-like big eyes. There was really something wrong with this item. However, she could not figure out what was going on even after looking at it for a while. Chu Luwe pinched her little face and then handed her the hammer. Family Wei, your item. Wei Zhe was about to step forward when Chu Luwe suddenly took back the item. He raised his eyebrows and said with a half-smile, I'm not going to lie to you. To tell you the truth, I'm also very curious about this treasure of yours. Previously, I had used 3 sacred weapons and 8 Dozun stage divine weapons. However, you only relied on this iron hammer to firmly suppress me. This thing of yours is simply more powerful than a sacred weapon. Wei Zhe's heart skipped a beat. No matter what, that's my business. It has nothing to do with you. How can it have nothing to do with me? You almost defeated me with this item. I'm just curious. It doesn't seem like a big deal to ask a few more questions, right? As Chu Luwe spoke, he held the hammer in his hand and weighed it in his hand. He seemed to be eager to give it a try. Although the Thousand Peaks halberd did not recognize you as its master, why would you care about those things when you have such a treasure? Wei Zhe was furious and immediately attacked. A few silver needles flew out. They instantly enveloped Chu Luwe. The two of them were very close to each other. Wei Zhe's attack came without any warning. Chu Luwe had just heard the sound of the air being torn apart. When he looked over, he saw that the silver needles had already flown to his eyes. There was no way to avoid them. At this moment, a golden barrier suddenly condensed in front of him. Clang, 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 clang. The silver needles were blocked. After a series of clanging sounds, they were crushed into powder by the terrifying pressure of the barrier before they could fall to the ground. They disappeared in an instant. Wei Zhe sucked in a breath of cold air and looked at the tall figure that had appeared in front of Chu Luwe out of nowhere. Rong Xiu's strength was already so powerful. Family Wei clan leader. You attacked without a word. Isn't your temper a little too impatient? Rong Xiu spoke slowly, but his voice was cold. You're in such a hurry. Are you worried that we will snatch your item in public? Or do you have something that can't be seen? As soon as Rong Xiu finished speaking, Wei Zhe was like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. He retorted harshly. Rong Xiu, don't make irresponsible remarks. Chu Liuyue's eyes suddenly focused. Rong Xiu tilted his head. What's wrong? Chu Liyue hesitated for a moment, raised his eyes to look at him, and handed the hammer over. Take a look. The aura inside was inexplicably familiar. Wonderful book house. Chapter 2073. Rong Xiu took the item. The moment he touched the hammer, he raised his eyebrows and narrowed his eyes. Seeing his reaction, Chu Liyue was even more certain of his guess. Rong Xiu was silent for a moment, then he looked up. The two of them looked at each other for a moment, and they both knew what the other was thinking. The aura inside, it was very similar. Wei Zhe's eyes were fixed on the two of them, and his back was already drenched in sweat. The two of them were very cunning. Could it be that they had really discovered something? Just as he was feeling extremely nervous, Rong Xiu suddenly walked over with the hammer. Wei Zhe held his breath. Rong Xiu's every step felt like he was stepping on his heart. Soon, Rong Xiu stood a step away from Wei Zhe. Then, he handed the item over with a relaxed expression and chuckled. Why are you so nervous, family Wei master? I'll return it to you. Wei Zhe looked at him suspiciously. After confirming that he was not joking, he reached out and took the hammer. The moment the item fell into his hands, his heart, which had been hanging in the air, finally settled down. However, Rong Xiu's next sentence immediately made him nervous again. Oh right, I suddenly thought of something. Why haven't I seen family Wei master on the way here? Young family Wei master was Wei Shiping. Back then, he had colluded with outsiders to frame Chu Liyue and Rong Xiu, and was expelled from Lingxiao College. Since then, Wei Shiping had never appeared again. Now that Rong Xiu suddenly mentioned him, many people did not even realize who he was talking about. Wei Zhe's heart sank. He unconsciously clenched the hammer in his hand and quickly glanced at Rong Xiu. But Rong Xiu's eyes were as deep as the sea, and his expression was calm and indifferent. Nothing could be seen. Wei Zhe said reluctantly, Why are you suddenly asking this? Rong Xiu said, It's nothing. I just thought of him when I saw you. Family Wei master? Can't answer? Wei Zhe paused for a moment. There's nothing hard to answer. It had disappeared ever since he left Lingxiao College. We also know where he is now. Rong Xiu smiled faintly. He's your son. Although he did make a mistake back then, he didn't deserve to die. I didn't expect you to be so heartless. Wei Zhe frowned and said coldly, He did something wrong and disgraced my family Wei. This is what he should bear. How can you talk about being heartless? It seemed that he was still angry at the mention of Wei Shiping. I see. Rong Xiu's face showed a trace of regret. What a pity. I heard that you originally thought highly of him as the successor of the family Wei master. Wei Zhe's face was livid. Obviously, he didn't want to talk about it anymore. He turned and left. When he left, he put away the hammer. Rong Xiu looked at his back meaningfully, but didn't say anything more. Tang Ke's voice came again. Congratulations. You won. This voice immediately attracted everyone's attention. Chu Liyue raised her head slightly, her red lips curling. Thank you, Senior Tang Ke. Tang Ke said, My inheritance is behind one of the 10 bronze doors. Now you can choose one. If you can choose it, everything will be yours. If you can't, you can only blame yourself for not being fated to be with me. Everyone looked at each other. They thought that after winning this round, Chu Liyue could directly get Tang Ke's inheritance. Who knew that they would have to choose again? Choosing 1 out of 10, the probability was too low. Chu Liyue didn't seem surprised. She smiled and nodded gently. Okay. She knew that Tang Ke wouldn't give everything away so easily, so it was normal for her to set this up. Tang Ke was quite surprised to see her agree so readily. You agreed so readily. Aren't you worried that you'll make the wrong choice and end up with nothing? Chu Luiwei shook her head and smiled in relief. I've done all I can. As for whether I'll have this opportunity, it's up to God. No matter what the result is, I have no regrets. Tang Ke paused for a moment, then suddenly laughed. Haha, you're quite interesting, girl. Good. Now, I'll clear the field for you. You choose. As soon as she finished speaking, a powerful force swept over and went straight for everyone. Immediately after, they felt as if they were being pulled by something, and everything before their eyes instantly turned dark. Chu Luiwei turned around. The huge space became empty, and she was the only one left. Oh no, Rongxiu was also there. Chu Luiwei narrowed her eyes. Tang Ke's voice sounded again. You're Rongxiu, right? Rongxiu raised his eyebrows. Although you didn't participate in the competition just now, the halberd of 10,000 peaks has recognized you as its master. After all, it was made by me personally. For its sake, I'll give you a chance. After this girl chooses, you can also choose once. Rongxiu cupped his fists. Thank you, Senior Tang Ke. Chu Luiwei touched her chin. Tisk. To think that she had worked so hard to get such an opportunity. However, Rongxiu was so easy to get. From the beginning to the end, he didn't seem to have done anything. His luck was really incomparable. Girl, you go first. Chu Luiwei stopped thinking and looked at the 10 doors around her. Every door was exactly the same, and she couldn't see any difference. If it were someone else, she would have taken a gamble. Unfortunately, she wasn't. With a thought, the armillary shield appeared in her hand. Clang. The armillary shield fell to the ground, and several cracks spread on the ground. At this moment, it seemed that the entire space trembled. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 2074. I'm blind. Why don't I let the armillary shield help me choose? As Chu Luiwei spoke, she placed one hand on the armillary shield. She held her breath and focused, injecting a stream of force into it. Buzz. In the next moment, a faint blue stream of light appeared on the armillary shield. The mysterious runes engraved on it also seemed even more mysterious under the illumination of the faint glow. Chu Luiwei waited quietly. However, after a quarter of an hour, the armillary shield did not react at all. Chu Luiwei frowned slightly. When she was outside the door, she clearly felt the armillary shield fluctuate. Why was it now? She waited for a while, but there was still no change. The armillary shield did not help her choose. Tang Ke's voice sounded faintly. You're really smart, girl. Unfortunately, although the armillary shield can sense my presence, it can't help you choose. You should do it yourself. Chu Luiwei paused. Her fingers slowly swept across the secret runes on the armillary shield, and a look of deep thought flashed across her eyes. The bronze door knocker had a similar pattern. It was definitely not a coincidence. However, for some reason, the armillary shield seemed to be suppressed by some force here. Although the feeling was very subtle, she could still tell. Tang Ke seemed to not want her to use the armillary shield. Countless thoughts flashed through Chu Luiwei's mind, but her face remained calm. After a short hesitation, she finally raised her head. Okay. Tang Ke asked her to choose, so she would choose. At the same time, outside the tomb, Shengguanjing only felt that the world was spinning. After about 15 minutes, the surrounding darkness gradually faded. When his feet stepped on the ground again, Shengguanjing heaved a sigh of relief. He immediately looked around and saw a tightly shut door. It was the door that Chu Luiwei had opened and let them in. At this moment, the door was locked. The bronze door knocker shook twice and stopped. Everything seemed to have returned to its original state. All kinds of voices came from behind. It was the group of people who had been sent out at the same time. At this moment, they had all woken up. Everyone looked at each other in dismay and quickly understood they had been sent back to the stone forest by Tang Ke. Are we out? Why isn't Shengguanyu online? She's going to receive Senior Tang Ke's inheritance, so of course she's not here. Didn't Senior Tang Ke say that she was the only one left there? When she came out, the entire Divine Ruins world would probably change, right? This was not an exaggeration. Tang Ke was the undisputed top refiner in the Divine Ruins world. Whoever could inherit his mantle would almost certainly have a successful future. With his favor, Chu Luiwei was very likely to break through and become a refining saint in the future. At that time, her identity would really be different. And the appearance of a weapon-refining saint could naturally change the current situation of the entire divine ruins. What was more, there was also Shangguan Jing, who was quite appreciated by Tang Ku, who wasn't extremely envious. Her luck is truly heaven-defying. However, this result was obtained from their competition. She had won fair and square, so the others couldn't say anything. Wei Zhe looked around vigilantly and suddenly realized that something was wrong. Where's Rong Xiu? The few people standing beside him were all his followers. When they heard this, they hurriedly looked around. In the end, they couldn't find Rong Xiu's figure even after searching for a while. There were only so many people in total. As long as they looked around, they could tell who was there and who wasn't. Furthermore, a person like Rong Xiu was too conspicuous. Even if he stood among countless people, he could still be seen with a glance. Patriarch, he really doesn't seem to be here. Wei Zhe suddenly realized something and frowned. He looked at the door and cried out in shock. He was also left inside? The news that Rong Xiu didn't come out with everyone quickly spread. Everyone was filled with doubts. After thinking about it, they could only blame it on the Thousand Peaks halberd. After all, it was a sacred artifact that Tang Ke had personally refined. It was normal that he would look at Rong Xiu differently. After thinking about this, Wei Zhe secretly gritted his teeth and brooded over this matter. The Thousand Peaks halberd belonged to him from the start. If Rong Xiu hadn't suddenly appeared and snatched it away, he would be the one left inside now. Wei Zhe was burning with anger. His blood and qi churned, and he spat out a few mouthfuls of blood. Patriarch! The few people beside him hurriedly came to help him. Get lost! Wei Zhe pushed them away with an ugly expression. He found a place to sit down alone and consumed a pill to adjust his breathing and recover from his injuries. He looked down at his palm. The cut from before had already scabbed over, leaving only a faint mark. He gritted his teeth and closed his eyes. Fortunately, I wasn't discovered. Shangguan Jing narrowed his eyes and sized up Wei Zhe. After a while, he retracted his gaze and fell into deep thought. Obviously, there was something wrong with Wei Zhe. Previously, when they were inside, Rong Xiu suddenly asked about Wei Shiping. Obviously, it wasn't a coincidence. At that time, Shangguan Jing had been by Chu Liyue's side, so he also had an impression of this name. Could it be that the secret of the hammer was also related to it? Shangguan Jing rubbed the space between his eyebrows. Now was obviously not a good time to ask. It was better to wait until Yu and Rong Xiu came out from inside. Silence. Chu Liyue stood in the middle and slowly glanced at the 10 doors. She couldn't tell where Tang Ke's voice came from, and she couldn't be sure which door the fluctuation on the celestial shield had sensed the existence behind. Therefore, she could only choose blindly. After a while, Chu Liyue raised her hand and pointed at the door on the left in the middle. Senior Tang Ke, I choose this. Once you make a choice, you can't regret it. I'll ask you again. Are you sure? I'm sure. Tang Ke paused for a moment and suddenly laughed. Good. Since you've made up your mind, then just go forward and push the door open. Chu Liyue composed herself and stepped forward. After taking a step, she suddenly stopped and turned to look at Rong Xiu beside her. She remembered that Tang Ke had said that after she made her choice, Rong Xiu would also have the same chance. She wanted to know which one Rong Xiu had chosen. Why don't you choose first and then we'll set off together? Before Rong Xiu had time to speak, Tang Ke's voice sounded again. No. He can only choose after you go in. Chu Liyue wrinkled her nose. This famous senior Tang Ke was indeed powerful, but there were too many rules, yes. Although she also knew that the two of them had different choices and it should be difficult for them to meet after going in, she was just a little curious. She didn't expect that even this was not allowed. Rong Xiu laughed and walked over to hold her hand. His slightly calloused fingers gently slid across her palm, causing her to tremble slightly. He wrapped his long arms around her and pulled her into his arms. The light cold fragrance instantly surrounded Chu Luiyue. He put his chin on her forehead and rubbed it gently. His voice was low. "Don't worry. I'll find you as soon as possible." Chu Luiyue nodded subconsciously, then looked up at him and smiled. "We've chosen different doors. If you find me, I'm afraid it's not convenient. Anyway, we'll probably come back in the end. Why don't we meet here?" There seemed to be a dark light in Rongxiu's eyes, and his thin scarlet lips curved slightly. He would never refuse her request. "Then I'll go first." Chu Luiyue blinked, then turned and walked toward the door she had chosen. This place was spacious and empty. However, after swallowing the Tianlei, she had recovered a lot of her strength, so she was quite fast. In a short while, she arrived at the door. Taking a deep breath, she finally raised her hand and placed it on the bronze door. It was cold to the touch, rough and heavy. She exerted a little force. Creak! The door in front of her opened with a creak. A vicissitude and distant aura hit her in the face. It was as if she had opened a dusty box that had been sealed for many years. She could even smell a trace of the ancient smell from it. She focused her eyes and looked inside. It was pitch black. No one knew what was inside. Chu Luiyue composed herself and walked inside. Her figure quickly disappeared into the darkness. Bang! The bronze door closed again, completely blocking Rongxiu's line of sight. The spacious space fell into silence again. Rongxiu stared at the door for a while, then looked away. At this moment, the gentleness and affection in his eyes had completely disappeared. It was replaced by the usual coldness and solemnity. It was as if the mountains and rivers had frozen over 1,000 miles, and the cold air was awe-inspiring. The surrounding temperature seemed to have dropped a lot. After a while, his thin lips opened slightly. "Tang Ku. You're presumptuous. Wonderful book house." Chapter 2075. His voice was cold and low, like jade hitting each other, but it was also wrapped in an extremely terrifying pressure. As soon as he finished speaking, the ground under his feet was covered with a faint layer of white frost. A gust of wind swept over with cold air. Then, a translucent phantom appeared in front of Rongxiu. It was a man who looked to be in his 30s, wearing a blue robe. He was tall and straight, and his handsome face could be vaguely seen. It was Tang Ku. If they did not see it with their own eyes, they would find it hard to believe that the legendary Tang Ku was so young. In fact, because of his outstanding talent, he had broken through the shackles long ago and became a supreme god expert. As a result, he maintained his figure and appearance from then on. Seeing that Rongxiu was angry, a trace of deep fear flashed in his eyes. Then he clasped his hands and bowed respectfully to Rongxiu. "I acted without authorization and led Master Yu into the wind separation cave. I hope your highness can forgive me." Rongxiu looked at him coldly. "Yes, madam." Tang Ku suddenly came back to his senses and quickly bowed his head. "I misspoke. I almost forgot that your highness is now married." Rongxiu took a step forward. The increasingly heavy pressure was almost unbearable for Tang Ku. Rongxiu said coldly, "No matter which of these 10 doors she chooses, it will lead to the wind separation cave in the end. You want her to help you save people? But do you know how dangerous it is for her?" The question made Tang Ku's heart tremble violently. He gritted his teeth, lifted his clothes, and directly knelt down. "Your Highness, this subordinate understands all of what you've said. But I have no choice. 10,000 years have passed. I can't wait any longer." Even if he knew that doing so would make His Highness angry, he had to do it. This was his only chance. Rongxiu looked at him condescendingly. Tang Ku's head was on the ground and her hands were on the ground. She was almost unable to stand up because of this aura. After a long time, Rongxiu turned around and walked towards the door that Chu Luiyue had just entered. Sensing the commotion, Tang Ku hurriedly dissuaded him. "Your Highness, you can't go to the wind separation cave now." Rongxiu stopped in his tracks. He naturally knew this. If he forced his way in now, the situation would only worsen. "I will wait here." Rongxiu stood in front of the door with one hand behind his back and a gloomy expression on his face. If she returns unharmed, I will let bygones be bygones. But if she is hurt, Tang Ku, your 10,000 years of waiting will be in vain. Tang Ku's heart trembled, and then she let out a long breath, closed her eyes, and kowtowed sincerely. Thank you, Your Highness. Chu Luiwei was naturally unaware of the situation outside. After entering the bronze door, after a short period of darkness, there was a ray of light in front of her. Chu Luiwei calmed down and walked forward. After walking through a narrow passage, she found that there was a silver barrier at the end. As for the faint glow, it was coming from the barrier. Chu Luiwei looked carefully. The pressure on this barrier was extremely strong, but it didn't seem dangerous. She hesitated and stretched out her hand, but was surprised to find that her hand easily passed through the barrier. Chu Luiwei widened her eyes in surprise. She had never encountered such a situation before. After hesitating for a moment, she walked forward. As expected, her whole body passed through easily. Just as she was full of doubts, she was shocked by the scene in front of her. Behind the barrier was a completely different world. Looking ahead, it was a flat and wide field. Under the vast sky, 2 tombstones stood quietly. Wonderful book house. Chapter 2076. Loneliness, loneliness, and bleakness. These were the emotions that surged into Chu Luiwei's heart when she saw the 2 tombstones. Apart from these 2 tombstones, there was nothing else in the entire field. It was as if they had been standing here since an extremely long time ago. As if driven by some force, Chu Luiwei stepped forward. She frowned as soon as she took a step. In this place, he couldn't fly. This place was clearly not a normal natural world, but a unique small space. You, do you want me to bring you there? Dumpling's voice came from her heart. Chu Luiwei shook her head. No need. Even she was greatly suppressed, so Tuanzi might not be spared either. Anyway, there was nothing to be anxious about. She might as well walk over slowly. She suddenly thought of something and looked back. That silver barrier was like a flame, quickly burning away. In an instant, the void was empty. At this moment, she had completely entered this strange small space. Chu Luiwei pursed her lips and walked toward the 2 tombstones. Although she could not fly, she had already tempered her divine body, so her speed was not slow. About 2 hours later, she finally arrived in front of the 2 tombstones. The tombstones were carved from white jade and were about the height of a person. Probably because they had been through too much wind, frost, and rain, there were already traces of time on them. The words on the tombstones were already a little blurry. But if one looked carefully, they could still be distinguished. The strange thing was that only one of the 2 tombstones had words on it. Chu Luiwei looked to her right. There was a line of words carved on the tombstone. Tang Ku's tomb. Chu Luiwei frowned slightly. Although the outside world had always said that Tang Ku was dead, and even before they came in, they had always thought that this was Tang Ku's tomb. But in fact, Tang Ku clearly still had a soul left. He was not dead at all. Then who set up this tombstone? Other than Tang Ku, there should be no one else here. Could it be that he carved it himself? Chu Luiwei felt a burst of absurdity and disbelief at the thought that came to his mind. However, other than this answer, no other explanation seemed to make sense. She looked at the tombstone on the left. The surface was smooth and flat, and there were no words carved on it. The nameless tomb. Chu Luiwei rested his chin on his hand and fell into deep thought. To be able to stand side by side with Tang Ku's tomb, the person buried under this tombstone was naturally not an ordinary person. But why was there no name on it? Was it because the person who set up the monument didn't know who this person was? Or, this person's name couldn't appear on it? Chu Luiwei carefully recalled Tang Ku's life. Back then, he had left the Tang clan alone. After he disappeared without a trace, the people of the Tang family were quickly exterminated. It was unlikely that the person below was anyone else from the Tang family. Who could it be? Tang Ku could summon the wind and summon the rain. It was hard to imagine what kind of person he would allow to be buried with him. Chu Luiwei didn't think that Tang Ku didn't know the situation here. Did he let me in on purpose? Chu Luiwei had a lot of questions in her mind. She stared at the nameless tombstone and fell into deep thought. Suddenly, a name appeared in her mind. Wait a minute. Back then, there was indeed a person who disappeared almost at the same time as Tang Ku. It was that person, Mr. Su. Just as this thought flashed through her mind, Chu Liyue's eyes flashed. Those sacred artifacts actually flew out and landed in front of the nameless tombstone. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 2077. A ray of light flew out of the heavenly square cauldron and landed on the tombstone. It was as if the intense darkness was suddenly torn apart by the light. Something gradually appeared on the tombstone. Chu Liyue's eyebrows moved slightly. Then, the flowing cloud flying diagram and the great azure sun axe appeared. The three rays of light converged. A mysterious rune was revealed bit by bit. Chu Liyue looked at it. These runes were somewhat familiar. She seemed to have seen them on the armillary shield. In order to confirm her thoughts, she summoned the armillary shield and carefully examined it. Indeed, these runes were exactly the same as the one on the armillary shield. However, the runes engraved on the tombstone were only half of those on the armillary shield. Moreover, these runes seemed to be sealed by something. After the light of the three divine artifacts surged, only a part of them was lit up. The rest of the runes were dark and could not be seen clearly. Could it be that 5 divine artifacts were required to be here at the same time to reveal their original appearance? Chu Liyue crossed her arms and fell into deep thought. However, the reaction of the 3 divine artifacts was enough to prove that this was very likely Mr. Su's tomb. The 2 of them were buried in the same place. Chu Liyue took a deep breath. Her heart was still surging with waves. The world only knew that the 2 of them had a shocking battle back then. After the battle ended in a draw, they disappeared without a trace. Who would have thought that their tombstones were erected together? Tang Ku asked her to come in. Could it be related to Mr. Su? After all, she had 3 divine artifacts made by Mr. Su. Suddenly, a fluctuation appeared on the armillary shield. Then, a faint glow overflowed from it and covered half of it. Chu Liyue was very familiar with this feeling. In the beginning, when she was outside and before she came in, the armillary shield had shown a similar reaction. So, it was not Tang Ku's summon, but Mr. Su's tomb? After that, Chu Liyue subconsciously raised her hand and reached forward. Her palm gently covered the runes. Thump, thump, thump. The sound of a heartbeat came from the tombstone. Chu Liyue was shocked. This heartbeat was not hers. Just as she was about to retreat, she suddenly saw that under her palm, there was a sudden burst of light. Almost at the same time, the force in her body began to surge toward the tombstone at an astonishing speed. Not good. Chu Liyue sensed that something was amiss and immediately increased his strength. However, he was shocked to find that he could no longer withdraw his hand from the tombstone. There seemed to be something inside that was madly devouring her origin power. As for her body, it was as if it was being suppressed by an invisible force. She was unable to move. Bang bang. The sound of his heartbeat became clearer and clearer. Chu Liyue could feel the force in his body rapidly depleting. She frowned. Fortunately, she had stored an extremely shocking amount of origin power within her dantian. Otherwise, just this short consumption would have been enough to overdraft her. You. Sensing that something was wrong, Dumpling also jumped out. Seeing Chu Liyue's frown, Dumpling was also very anxious. She and Chu Liyue were bound by a life contract, so she knew very well that Chu Liyue's energy was being devoured at a frightening speed. Let me help you. Dumpling was about to step forward, but Chu Liyue immediately stopped her in her tracks. Stop right there. Don't come over. The aura within the tombstone was extremely powerful. More importantly, it was clearly coming for her. Even Dumpling would not be of much help. If she was not careful, she might even implicate Dumpling. Dumpling heard this and instinctively stood rooted to the ground. However, seeing Chu Liyue's rapidly pale face, her heart also clenched. Her grape-like eyes were instantly covered by a layer of mist. Chu Liyue took a deep breath. Zichen. As soon as she finished speaking, a black figure flashed in front of her. Zichen also responded to the summons. Chu Lua said, "Help me look after Dumpling." Zichen nodded. After speaking, he was about to move when he saw fine beads of sweat continuously appearing on Chu Lue's forehead. A rare hint of hesitation appeared on his cold and indifferent face. "Master, do you really not need help?" Looking at her like this really made him feel uneasy. Chu Lue forced a smile. "Don't worry, I know what I'm doing." The reason why she asked Zichen and Dumpling to temporarily retreat was that even she felt that the situation was too dangerous. If something happened, the three of them would be directly wiped out. Therefore, after careful consideration, this was the most appropriate choice. Zichen instantly understood her thoughts. He pursed his thin lips and nodded. "Zichen will not disappoint you. Master, please be careful." After speaking, he moved and came to Dumpling's side. At this moment, Dumpling was about to step forward barefooted. Before she could take 2 steps, Zichen blocked her way. "Master, you mean to wait and see?" Zichen lowered his head and looked at the little one in front of him. His voice was as cold as usual. Dumpling's line of sight was blocked by 2 long legs. When she heard this, she raised her head and put her hands on her waist indignantly. "But now Yu is in danger. I want to go." She snorted indignantly and changed direction. She walked around Zichen with her short legs, intending to rush over. As she walked, she muttered, "I'm the young master of the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan. And I've already opened my 5th meridian. I can definitely help Yu. Even if I can't, I can call Grandpa Clan leader and the others." Ugh. Before she finished speaking, her body suddenly flew into the air. It was actually Zichen who had directly scooped her up. Whatever she says is the truth. Dumpling's small body was easily locked in his arms. She began to struggle with all her might. "Let go of me. I want to go over." However, her small body was not worth mentioning in front of Zichen. Although her strength had increased greatly, Zichen was not to be trifled with. After all, behind Zichen stood the great Phoenix Dragon Clan's clan leader, Maojin. The current Dumpling was still very young compared to her. Seeing that Dumpling was unwilling to give up, Zichen narrowed his eyes and said coldly, "If you're not afraid of delaying her, go ahead." As soon as he said that, Tuanzi finally calmed down. She was just worried about Yu. After thinking for a long time, she looked up at Zichen. "Are you saying that Yu will really be fine?" Zichen raised his chin. "You just have to watch for yourself." He was also her contracted magical beast, and his worries were no less than Dumpling's. But he knew that Chu Lue did not need their help at this time. That tombstone, from the beginning, it was targeted at her. Time passed slowly. Chu Lue's face was pale. Her vision turned black. This was a sign of exhaustion. She closed her eyes. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 2078. At this moment, the amount of energy that was being drained from her had exceeded the limit of an ordinary high god. If not for the abundant force stored in her body, she would have died from exhaustion. However, the scary thing was that this was not the end. It was as if there was a bottomless pit in the tombstone that was constantly draining her energy. Chu Lue closed her eyes and adjusted her breathing as she pondered. What was hidden in there? Thump, 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 thump. Chu Lue took a deep breath and opened her eyes again. Under her palm, the originally dim areas of the runes engraved on the tombstone were gradually lighting up. Obviously, it was benefiting from the fact that it was draining her energy. Chu Lue suddenly curled her lips and smiled helplessly. If I had known this would happen, I would have snatched the remaining divine weapons first. If all 5 of Mr. Su's divine weapons were in her hands, she would not have committed such a grave crime. But at this moment, things had already come to this point, and all of this could only be said. Chu Lue closed her eyes. Outsiders would probably think that she was accepting Tang Ku's inheritance. Who would have thought that she was going through something like this? She finally understood that Senior Tang Ku was actually trying to lure her here. There was probably no hope for the inheritance anymore. Now, she only hoped that she could get out of here in one piece. I wonder what kind of relationship Mr. Su has with him that he would go through so much trouble. Chu Liwei mumbled to herself. Suddenly, a faint cracking sound could be heard. Chu Liwei was stunned and immediately turned her head to look. The last dim area of the ruins was finally completely covered by the lustrous light. Buzz. In an instant, the light shone brightly. Chu Liwei felt a vast and majestic aura suddenly surging out from the tombstone. It was coming straight for her. She was shocked and immediately retreated. But this time, the inexplicable pressure around her finally dissipated, and she quickly retreated a distance away. Chu Liwei did not expect that she could successfully retreat. She looked at her palm in shock. Did they split up? That tombstone. She instinctively looked up and saw that the light on the tombstone was rapidly gathering. Then, it gradually condensed into a translucent figure. It was a woman who looked to be in her 20s. She wore a light green dress and had a slender figure. Her black hair casually fell to her ankles and she wore a silver-white headband inlaid with rubies. Her facial features were delicate and beautiful. When she looked over, her eyes were like spring water, warm and gentle. With a single glance, one could tell that she was an extremely gentle woman. She stepped forward, crossed her hands in front of her stomach, and curtsied toward Chu Liwei. Su Li, thanks miss for saving my life. Her voice was melodious and it was sweet. Chu Liwei widened her eyes slightly. This, Mr. Su? She asked in disbelief. When Su Li smiled, two small dimples appeared on the corners of her lips. Su Li will never forget Mrs. Kindness. It's really her. Chu Liwei looked as if she was struck by lightning. She stared blankly at the woman in front of her, but her heart was in turmoil. Su Li, Mr. Su, who was rumored to be all-powerful and equally matched with Tang Ku, was actually a woman. Chu Liwei spent a lot of effort to calm the waves in her heart. She opened her mouth but did not know what to say. There were so many versions of the rumors, but none of them said that Mr. Su was a woman. All of this happened too suddenly, and even Chu Liwei was dazed. She had always thought that Mr. Su was an old man or a middle-aged man with a strong physique. Anyway, he was very different from the beautiful and gentle woman in front of her. May I know your name, miss? Seeing that Chu Liwei did not speak, Su Li thought that her sudden appearance had startled her, so she asked gently. She could not know the woman's name since she had saved her life. Chu Liwei gradually regained her rationality. Shangguan Yu. So it's Miss Shangguan. Su Li smiled and looked at the armillary shield beside Chu Liwei. Her eyes flashed with a hint of emotion. Miss Shangguan, are you from Peach Blossom Dock? Chu Liwei followed her gaze and looked over. It was normal for Su Li to guess that since the armillary shield was here. She sorted out her thoughts and said, yes. It seems that Peach Blossom Dock belongs to Miss Shangguan now. Chu Liwei was stunned for a moment. How did Mr. Su know? Su Li covered her mouth and smiled. Since the armillary shield has recognized Miss Shangguan as its owner, Peach Blossom Dock naturally belongs to Miss Shangguan. Chu Liwei had already guessed that Peach Blossom Dock was related to the armillary shield. After hearing Su Li's words, she was even more certain. The battle between Su Li and Tang Ke took place at Peach Blossom Dock. Half of the runes of the armillary shield were engraved on her tombstone. It was normal for her to know about this. Chu Liwei nodded slightly. Mr. Su is indeed wise. Su Li smiled again. Miss Shangguan, you are treating me as an outsider. Chu Liwei shook her head and smiled. You are a senior, and everyone calls you Mr. Su. I'm used to calling you that. Although the Su Li in front of her was gentle, generous, elegant, and calm, she wouldn't forget that half of the current 10 great sacred artifacts were created by her. Such a person was definitely worthy of being addressed as Mr. Su Li's eyes flickered, as if she had fallen into a distant memory. After a long time, she smiled and sighed. Back then, I disguised myself as a man and walked around the world of divine ruins, so that was why everyone misunderstood her true identity. Chu Liwei nodded. Actually, she had already guessed this. Su Li's battle with Tang Ku was already shocking enough. If everyone knew that she was a woman, it would probably cause even more shock. Su Li said with a guilty look on her face. Speaking of which, just now, I didn't want to forcefully devour Miss Shangguan's force. I hope Miss Shangguan can forgive me. Speaking of this, Chu Liwei also had a lot of questions. Mr. Su, you mean, was she not the one who did all this? As if she had seen Chu Liwei's doubts, Su Li sighed softly and turned to look at the tombstone. Miss Shangguan, do you know who erected this tombstone? Chu Liwei hesitated for a moment. Senior Tang Ku? Su Li nodded, and a touch of worry appeared between her eyebrows. In fact, these two tombstones were erected by him. After that battle, I died and my soul scattered, but he survived. It was because of his help that my soul was preserved and I slept until now. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 2079. However, this method can only preserve my soul, but it can't really revive me. Furthermore, as time passes, my soul will grow weaker and weaker. In the end, it will completely dissipate. She turned around and looked at Chu Liwei with a complicated expression. In a few months, it will be the end of my lifespan. If it wasn't for Miss Shangguan's help today, I'm afraid. Once she said this, Chu Liwei had even more questions in her heart. Mr. Su, why me? She had come back to her senses. Tang Ke only had one purpose from the beginning, which was to lure her here and revive Su Li. However, she had nothing to do with Su Li and Tang Ke. There were so many people in the world, why did they choose her? If she had to say, is it because of the 3 divine artifacts? This was the only and biggest connection between her and Su Li. Hearing this, Su Li shook her head. Those are just superficial factors. In fact, the real reason is the armillary shield. Chu Liwei was stunned. That's right. Half of the runes on the armillary shield were engraved on the tombstone. She suddenly thought of something and looked at Tang Ke's tomb next to her. Could it be? That's right. The other half of the runes are engraved on this tombstone. Su Li said softly. For a moment, Chu Liwei's mind was in a mess. Countless thoughts flashed through her mind. Back then, Su Li and Tang Ke fought to a draw and then disappeared. In fact, it was because Su Li died and Tang Ke brought her here to be buried. He also set up a tombstone next to her. This was a sacrificial burial? Then she thought of what Su Li said just now. Tang Ke had been trying to revive her for so many years, an answer was on the verge of appearing. Tang Ke clearly loved Su Li deeply. If not, he would never set up a tombstone for her and Su Li. He was not dead yet, but he had already planned to be buried together with her after he died. Chu Liwei took a deep breath. Everyone knew that Tang Ke was a genius who was aloof. He never married and had children in his life. Everyone thought that for someone like him, the only thought in his heart was to refine artifacts. How could he care about the love of the mortal world? Who would have thought that he would go to such an extent for Su Li? Senior Tang Ke, he treated you, Chu Liwei said hesitantly. The two of you have already. No. Su Li blushed slightly. The battle at Peach Blossom Cove was indeed the first time the two of us met. I come from a humble background, and I don't have much talent in martial arts. Therefore, I have been abandoned by my family since I was young. Later on, by chance, I discovered that I had a pretty good talent in refining artifacts. Later on, I left my family and followed my master to cultivate. Master is a weapon refining venerable, but he has always been living in seclusion and I have always followed him. It was only after I broke through to become a weapon refining venerable and my master passed away that I started to roam the divine ruins world. Chu Liwei understood. I see. This also explained why the world had never heard of her name. She had indeed been cultivating in peace all this time. At that time, I was young and ignorant. I heard that Tang Ke was very famous and was the #1 artificer in the world. Therefore, I sent a letter of challenge. Su Li was still emotional when she mentioned the past. Who would have thought that so many things would happen at Peach Blossom Cove? Wonderful Book House. Chapter 2080. She paused and did not continue. Instead, she raised her hand and pointed at her tombstone. When Tang Ku erected these two tombstones, he deliberately left a mechanism on them. If someone comes here, the mechanism will automatically activate and forcibly deprive him of his strength. In other words, no matter who comes here, it will be the same. Chu Liwei frowned slightly. If that was the case, it was too domineering. It would be fine if she was the one who came here today. But if it were someone else, he or she would not be so lucky to escape. Su Li nodded and comforted her. But don't worry. Although I didn't know about the mechanism before, you should be the only one who has come here all these years. Chu Liwei heaved a sigh of relief at first, but then her expression became a little strange. Why did it sound like Tang Ku had been waiting for her here since early in the morning? Su Li sighed and continued to speak. He must have known that the armillary shield has recognized you as its owner, so he let you in. In fact, Chu Liwei thought so too. So, only the owner of the armillary shield can help you? You can say that. Su Li smiled bitterly. After all, it was the armillary shield that caused my death and his serious injuries. Chu Liwei was shocked. Didn't you two compete in weapon refining at the Peach Blossom Dock? What does this have to do with the armillary shield? Su Li paused, looked up, and stared at Chu Liwei. Miss Shangguan, you don't know. Tang Ku and I were only weapon refining venerables at that time. The reason why we could break through the shackles and refine 5 divine weapons is actually related to the armillary shield. At that time, the armillary shield suddenly appeared in the world. We both knew that it was extraordinary and fought fiercely for it. During the process, the power of the armillary shield dissipated, causing chaos in the Peach Blossom Dock. The divine weapons that we refined at that time were further refined and became divine weapons by chance. Chu Liuyue's pupils suddenly shrank. Su Li's words were indeed a shocking secret. You mean, the reason why you and Senior Tang Ku were able to refine the 10 great sacred weapons was actually because of the power of the armillary shield. A small dimple appeared on Su Li's lips and she sighed softly. I don't know how much energy and mental energy is needed to refine a saint artifact. What's more, we were only venerables at that time. Even if we had heaven-defying abilities, how could we each refine 5 items at the same time? Chaotic Stone Forest. In the blink of an eye, half a month had passed. However, there was still no movement from the entrance. Everything looked exactly the same as it did in the beginning. There were no changes at all. Some people gradually became impatient. It's been so long. Why haven't they come out yet? TSK. That was the inheritance of the venerable artificer. How could he possibly use half a month's time? If you can't wait any longer, you can leave now. Why complain? I just thought it was a little strange, that's all. There's no other meaning. It's fine if Shanghai Yu hasn't come out, but why hasn't there been any movement from Rong Xiu either? He doesn't need such a long time to inherit Tang Ku's inheritance, right? That's hard to say. Don't forget that the Thousand Peaks halberd has already recognized him as its master. That's a saint artifact that Tang Ku personally refined. Even if it's just for the sake of this thing, Tang Ku will still favor him a little, right? Maybe he's waiting for Shanghai Yu inside. All kinds of discussions were heard one after another. After a long time, it was inevitable that people would have all kinds of guesses in their hearts. Shengguan Jing listened at the side. He stroked his beard and looked at the closed door thoughtfully. In fact, he wasn't worried about their safety. He was just curious about their progress inside. If Yu could really inherit Tang Ku's inheritance, he would have another trump card in the future. At this moment, a sharp whistle came from the sky. Everyone looked up, but they didn't see anything. However, Wei Zhe, who had been staying in a remote corner, suddenly stood up. He raised his head to take a look and furrowed his brows. The family Wei's people were here. Wei Zhe hesitated for a moment and walked outside. Family Wei's people, follow me. His followers hurriedly followed after hearing this. Many people looked over when they heard the commotion. It seemed that Wei Zhe was planning to leave. Family Wei's leader, you're leaving just like that? Someone raised his voice and asked. They haven't come out yet. Wei Zhe stopped in his tracks. That whistle is used by my family Wei to transmit messages. I have to go out and take a look. Only then did everyone understand. It seemed that the matter was not small. Otherwise, Wei Zhe wouldn't have chosen to leave so decisively. In the previous competition, he came in second place and almost won Tang Ke's inheritance. Was he convinced? No one could tell. Everyone thought that he would insist on staying here until the two of them came out. However, since the family Wei had something to deal with, others naturally couldn't say much. Wei Zhe continued to leave with his followers. Perhaps because Tang Ke had already chosen the inheritor, Wei Zhe and the others didn't encounter any accidents when they left this time. They were unimpeded all the way. Soon, their figures disappeared behind many stones. Most people quickly looked away. Only Shangguan Jing stared in the direction Wei Zhe left for a long time. The person next to him asked curiously, "Shangguan, what are you looking at?" Shangguan Jing said, "Nothing. I just feel that Wei Zhe left a little suddenly. Didn't he say that it was because the family Wei's people came to invite him?" After all, the stone forest is the family Wei's territory, and he has been here for a long time. Maybe there really is something that he needs to go back to deal with in person? Shangguan Jing didn't say anything. He still felt that something was wrong. Wei Zhe came to the stone forest this time for Tang Ke's tomb. It was impossible for the Wei clan to be unaware of this. Since that was the case, Wei Zhe should have made sufficient arrangements and preparations. What urgent matter could be more important than Tang Ke's tomb? The family Wei's people came just like that. Did they not think that Wei Zhe might be inheriting Tang Ke's inheritance at this time? Unless, they knew that Wei Zhe didn't have anything important to do at this moment. Although Wei Zhe had been staying here ever since he came out, no one could guarantee that he hadn't contacted the outside world. And when he left just now, there was even a hint of urgency and haste in his movements. Shangguan Jing pondered for a long time but couldn't come up with an answer. In the end, he suppressed this suspicion. On the other side, Wei Zhe walked out of the stone forest smoothly. When he took the last step, he looked back. It was quiet in the stone forest. No one could imagine what had happened inside during this period of time. An old man was already waiting outside. When he saw him come out, he immediately stepped forward. Wonderful book house. Chapter 2081. Patriarch, is everything all right? Wei Qihan asked with concern as he quickly sized up Wei Zhe. When he saw that Wei Zhe's aura was a little weak, he immediately became nervous. It seemed that things didn't go as smoothly as expected. Wei Zhe frowned. Tang Ke's inheritance was snatched by Shangguanyu. Wei Qihan's heart sank. Shangguanyu? The one from Peach Blossom Dock? This name had been too famous recently, and it was hard not to know. How is that possible? Don't you have Senior Tang Ke's 10,000 Peaks halberd? Also, you have... Wei Zhe's expression suddenly turned cold as he gave him a warning look. Wei Qihan immediately shut up. Wei Zhe's expression softened a little before he said, 10,000 Peaks halberd has acknowledged Rong Xiu as its master. As for the rest, I can't explain it in a few words. Anyway, the outcome has been decided, and it's useless to say anything. Wei Qihan was shocked and confused, but seeing that Wei Zhe didn't seem to want to talk about it, he wisely didn't continue asking. Well, as long as you're safe. Wei Zhe walked forward. How's the situation in the clan? Patriarch, don't worry. After I received your message, I came here alone without anyone noticing. Wei Zhe nodded in satisfaction. That's good. Hearing the conversation between the two, the people behind Wei Zhe were all shocked and looked at each other in dismay. Did the Patriarch inform Elder Wei Qihan first before coming out? Wei Qihan glanced at them. Patriarch, these people, hearing this, a strong sense of uneasiness surged in their hearts. Patriarch, Wei Zhe didn't stop walking. He didn't even turn his head. His voice was cold and indifferent. Clean them up and say that they died in the stone forest. Wei Qihan immediately accepted the order and waved his sleeve. Before those people could beg for mercy, their throats were all slit. Blood splattered everywhere. Soon, all of them fell to the ground, no longer breathing. Wei Qihan took out a small jade bottle and poured out some transparent and odorless liquid. The corpses quickly turned into puddles of water and evaporated, leaving no trace behind. His series of actions flowed smoothly like water. Clearly, this was not the first time he had done it. After he was done, he quickly stepped forward and caught up with Wei Zhe. The two figures quickly disappeared. Half an hour later, the two of them arrived at a mountain peak 100 miles away from the stone forest. Wei Zhe was familiar with the route and headed straight for the cave halfway up the mountain. Wei Qihan, on the other hand, concealed himself and was responsible for guarding outside the cave. Wei Zhe headed deeper into the cave. The deeper they went, the darker it became. However, Wei Zhe seemed to have been here many times. He did not slow down at all as he rushed straight into the cave. Tick-tock, tick-tock. The sound of water dripping could be faintly heard. When Wei Zhe heard this voice, he was delighted and immediately sped up. After turning a corner, a faint glow appeared. A small pool appeared in front of him. That ray of light came from a stalactite above the pool. Water continued to drip down from the top, finally dripping into the pool. Wei Zhe heaved a sigh of relief. He quickly stepped forward, took out the purplish-black hammer, and placed it in the center of the pool. Tick-tock. A drop of water happened to fall on the hammer. The patterns on it gradually became clearer. Wei Zhe immediately felt the depleted energy in his body being replenished. Thank goodness he made it back in time. Shiping, are you all right? Wei Zhe asked anxiously. A moment later, a young man's voice came from the purplish-black hammer. Father, don't worry. I'm fine. If Rong Xiao and Chu Luiwei were here, they would definitely recognize Wei Shiping's voice. When Wei Zhe heard this, he finally heaved a sigh of relief. However, when he thought of everything that had happened, he still could not completely relax. It's all my fault for being useless. I almost let you. It's not your fault. Wei Shiping's voice sounded a little weak, with a hint of gloominess and viciousness. It's all because those two are too cunning and treacherous. Otherwise, he and his father would have been the ones to inherit Tang Ke's legacy. Now, all of their carefully planned plans had been completely destroyed. When he mentioned this, Wei Zhe was filled with resentment. Those two are too cunning. Shiping, you should stay here and recuperate for now. I have a feeling that Rong Xiao seems to have discovered something. You can use this time to recuperate. Father, don't worry. I know what you're saying. Although I didn't succeed this time, at least I've absorbed a lot of Tianlei's energy. It won't be long before my strength reaches a new level. Only then did Wei Zhe truly feel at ease. During this time, I'll stay here and watch over you. When Shangguan Yu and the others come out of the stone forest, we can plan our revenge. The departure of Wei Zhe and the others did not affect the others. After they left, the stone forest quickly returned to its previous state. Everyone began to wait again. This kind of time was always long and torturous. However, they were really curious about Chu Liuyue's situation, so they had no choice but to continue. After Su Li finished speaking, Chu Luiyue was silent for a long time. She did not expect such a shocking secret to be hidden behind the 10 great sage artifacts. If these sage artifacts were all refined with the power of the celestial shield, then what about the celestial shield? What kind of existence was it? Su Li's hand slowly swept across the tombstone. The runes engraved on it were uneven and rough. Although we've all refined 5 sage artifacts, we've also paid a great price for it. My physical body has fallen, and my soul is on the verge of death. Although Tang Ke's condition is better than mine, erecting these 2 tombstones exhausted almost all of his energy. Chu Luiyue pondered for a long time and finally asked, why did Senior Tang Ke divide the runes on the celestial shield into 2 and engrave them on these 2 tombstones? Su Li looked back. This is the only way to wait until the day the celestial shield recognizes its master. She pointed at the 3 sage artifacts. Back then, the power in the celestial shield was divided into 2 by the 2 of us and then injected into the sage artifacts. If you want to completely awaken the celestial shield, you have to take back the power. Wonderful book house. Chapter 2082. Awaken the Celestial Shield? Chu Luiwei was a little surprised. In her opinion, the Celestial Shield had already awakened when it caused the mountain fire in the Peach Blossom Dock. Moreover, it had already recognized her as its master. Why did it still need to be awakened now? As if sensing her doubts, Su Li shook her head with a smile and explained. You are indeed the master of the Celestial Shield, but it's not in its original state. I can't describe with words how powerful the Celestial Shield is when it's fully unleashed. However, if you want to become stronger, this is the step you have to take. She looked extremely serious. Chu Luiwei paused and asked, if that's the case, what will happen to these divine artifacts in the end? Once the power is extracted, then wouldn't it become a pile of scrap metal again? You don't have to worry about this. Although the Celestial Shield's power is stored in these divine artifacts, awakening the Celestial Shield doesn't need to extract the power. All you need to do is to gather them. When 10 divine artifacts are gathered, the Celestial Shield will naturally awaken completely. Chu Luiwei then felt more at ease. She didn't know about the other divine artifacts, but the ones she had now were extremely precious and powerful. She really couldn't bear to destroy it. So, what I need to do is to gather 10 divine artifacts? Su Li nodded. Chu Luiwei rubbed her temples as she felt a headache coming on. Then you think too highly of me. It was easy to say, but it was very troublesome to do. After spending so much time and effort, she had only managed to obtain 3 of them. Excluding the Thousand Peaks halberd of the Rong Xiu, there were still 6 divine artifacts. Where could she find them? If she guessed correctly, the remaining divine artifacts were now scattered among the major families and clans in the Divine Ruins world. Those were the treasures of their clans. How could she snatch them? Even if she was now the Peach Blossom Dock's lord, it was still as difficult as ascending to heaven. Su Li's lips curved into a smile. Lady Shangguan, this might be extremely difficult for others, but for you, it is indeed something you can do. Don't forget that the Celestial Shield is now in your hands. Chu Luiwei's mind flickered. Mr. Su, you mean, the 10 great sacred artifacts only broke through their shackles and became sacred artifacts with the help of the Celestial Globe Shield's power. If the Armillary Heaven Shield summons them, they will naturally come. Chu Luiwei's eyelids twitched violently. Mr. Su, are you asking me to rob you? Su Li blinked her eyes and smiled. Her dimples were shallow, and she said gently, I'm sorry. How can you say that it's a robbery? In this world, the strong were respected. Whoever had the ability would win. Besides, even the Armillary Heaven Shield now belongs to you, Miss Shangguan, so why worry about those saint artifacts? That was yours in the first place. Outside the bronze door, Rong Xiu stood with his hands behind his back. Tang Ke knelt not far behind him. Silence reigned in the vast space. Only the countless Tianlei in the sky were still rotating leisurely. The radiance was resplendent and dazzling. At a certain moment, Rong Xiu's brows twitched and he turned around. Tang Ke immediately tensed up. Your Highness, Rong Xiu looked at him indifferently. Get up. Tang Ke was stunned at first, but then he suddenly realized something, and his eyes were overflowing with excitement. Your Highness, you mean, it was done. It seemed that it was done inside. Because Rong Xiu was here, he did not dare to secretly investigate the situation inside. At this moment, his heart was finally at ease. I dare not forget Master Yu's kindness. When Master Yu comes out safely, I will give you all my wealth. What he was talking about was the endless sea of thunder that had accumulated for tens of thousands of years. Rong Xiu raised his brows slightly and said calmly, she won't be interested in your little things. Wonderful book house. Chapter 2083. But, Su Li said hesitantly, summoning the 10 great sacred artifacts and awakening the Armillary Shield is still a little difficult for Miss Shangguan now. To be safe, Miss Shangguan should wait until you become a weapon-refining venerable before making a decision. Chu Luiwei nodded. She understood what Su Li meant. Summoning the 10 great sacred artifacts was definitely not an easy task. Even if she was the owner of the armillary shield now, it was still difficult to do it. It was already difficult for her to deal with 3 sacred artifacts at the same time, let alone 10. In addition, once the armillary shield is awakened, its power is amazing. Although Miss Shangguan is powerful and has tempered her divine body with the god-destroying tribulation, if you can use it in the god realm, your success rate will increase a lot. Su Li said seriously, and Chu Liue also listened carefully. Thank you for your advice, Mr. Su. I will remember it in my heart. Chu Liue's hand slowly brushed across the armillary shield. Although she also wanted to see the true power of the armillary shield, now was obviously not the right time. Before that, she had to improve her strength first. Feeling the uneven secret text under her finger, Chu Liue asked curiously. I have one more thing to ask. Mr. Su, do you recognize the secret text on this? Su Li shook her head. Chu Liue's heart sank slightly. In fact, she had already guessed this when she heard Su Li talk about the things that happened in the past. It was just that she was unwilling to give up and had to ask clearly. Originally, she thought that she could get some clues from Tang Ke. However, to be able to see Su Li and learn about the secrets of the armillary shield, this trip was not in vain. The so-called inheritance of Tang Ke did not exist. The secret to becoming a weapon-refining saint was the armillary shield and the 10 great sacred artifacts. For Su Li, Tang Ke really put in a lot of effort and did not hesitate to wait for 10,000 years. Although she was tricked into entering, after knowing the cause and effect, she could not be angry no matter what. She could only sigh endlessly. Chu Liue's mind calmed down. Since you have woken up now, how about you go out with me? Su Li heard this and was slightly stunned. Go out? Yeah. Chu Liue looked around. Although this place was full of energy, it was too lonely. As far as the eye could see, one would only feel a deep sense of loneliness. He really did not know how Tang Ke had endured for such a long time. She smiled at Su Li. If Senior Tang Ke sees you again, he will definitely be very happy. At the mention of Tang Ke, Su Li's expression wavered. In fact, that battle back then was the first time the two of them had met, and it was also the only time. After that, her physical body was destroyed and her soul scattered. If it wasn't for Tang Ke, she would have died long ago. Even she didn't know why Tang Ke would do this for her. Su Li bit her lips and hesitated. She still hadn't figured out how to face Tang Ke. Chu Liue looked at her. He didn't need to ask to know what Su Li was thinking. Although she was once the all-powerful Mr. Su, she was also a woman who knew nothing about love. She had spent most of her time and energy on cultivation. Originally, she had only issued a challenge to Tang Ke out of curiosity and competitiveness. Who knew that after the battle at Peach Blossom Dock, Su Li suddenly asked, Miss Shangguan, why do you think he did this? We've only met once and fought once. She knew how much Tang Ke had done for her, but it was also because of this that she was even more perturbed and confused. For a moment, she didn't know what to do. Chu Liue looked down and seemed to be thinking. After a while, she looked up at the 2 tombstones side by side and smiled. There seemed to be stars shining in her eyes. Love is the most unreasonable thing in the world. Outside the bronze gate. After confirming that Su Li had woken up, Tang Ke became anxious and looked in the direction of the gate from time to time. Rong Xiu glanced at him. You have waited for 10,000 years. What's the difference in a little while? No matter what, he had to wait for you or to rest. Tang Ke's face was a little embarrassed, but there was still unconcealable joy in his eyes. I'm just too happy, although he had been thinking about this day for a long time. But when all this really happened, he felt that it was too unreal in his heart and he couldn't believe it. Rong Xiu paused and said, Have you ever thought that after doing so much, you might not be able to keep her in the end? Tang Ke was stunned. After a moment of silence, he said, As long as she can be safe, I have no other request. Rong Xiu's thin scarlet lips slightly raised, revealing a very faint smile. Tang Ke was a little puzzled. Your Highness, why are you smiling? Rong Xiu was about to speak, but suddenly he turned back and looked at the bronze gate. Almost at the same time, Tang Ke suddenly realized something, and she looked up and fixed her eyes on it. Creak. The bronze gate that was closed tightly slowly opened. Two figures, one in front and one behind, walked out. The one in front was Chu Luiyue, and the translucent figure behind was undoubtedly Su Li. Chu Luiyue walked out and saw Rong Xiu standing not far from the gate. Her lips curved up, and she was about to say something when she suddenly saw a figure standing behind Rong Xiu. It was a man who looked to be in his 30s, handsome and tall. Chu Luiyue was stunned for a moment before she realized that this person was Tang Ku. Hearing his voice, Chu Luiyue thought that he should be quite old, but who knew that he was so young? Did he know that Su Li had woken up, so he came out? Senior Tang Ku. Chu Luiyue shook her head helplessly and smiled. You're finally willing to come out? Tang Ku's gaze fell on Su Li, and for a moment he was in a daze. Her appearance was exactly the same as when he first saw her, and there was no change at all. At this moment, he even felt that everything had happened yesterday. The long years in between were just a dream. Su Li's heart skipped a beat, but she was the first to react. Tang Ku. Long time no see. Tang Ku suddenly came back to his senses, suppressed the waves in his heart, and slowly smiled. Long time no see. Chu Luiyue's eyes swept back and forth between the two of them, and said with a smile, the two of you have been separated for a long time, and now that you finally meet, you should have a lot to say. We won't disturb you for now. As she spoke, she walked to Rong Xiu's side, gently nudged him with her elbow, and asked in a low voice, when did Senior Tang come out? Rong Xiu held her hand and pulled her in front of him. He looked around carefully for a while, and only when he was sure that she was all right, did he relax. Hearing Chu Luiyue's question, he thought for a moment. About an hour ago. Chu Luiyue calculated in her heart, that was about the time Su Li woke up. It seemed that Tang Ke should know the situation inside. She blinked and asked again, then, did Senior Tang Ke make things difficult for you? Rong Xiu's sword-like eyebrows raised slightly, and he smiled casually. That's not it. Wonderful book house, you're tuning in to the Han Li's Immortal Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.